Hello, thanks for joining me for this week's Bible reflection. My name's Ian Craigan and I'm a worship leader ALM at Christ Church, Broadheath. Today we read from Genesis and consider God's grace in a time of slavery. Close every door to me, keep those I love from me. Children of Israel are never alone. Tempted as I am, I won't be launching into song, but I bet you were already starting to hum along before the end. Does it surprise you, as it did me when I looked it up, that the musical Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat is over half a century old? With its lyrics and tunes woven into our memory banks, we need to be powerfully alert and receptive when we hear that story today, in case we drift off into fantasies of our favourite Joseph. Is it Donovan or Schofield or someone you've seen more recently? So let's familiarise ourselves with a bit of the background before we hear the reading. Jacob, who by deceit wrestled a blessing from his father Isaac, then wrestled a blessing from God and took the name Israel, is now an old man and patriarch of a large clan residing in the promised land of Canaan. By 2 wives and their 2 respective maids, he's father of a mixed brood of 12 sons, many of whom have already shown their hot-headedness by acts of treachery, murder and adultery. Now let's hear the passage from Genesis chapter 37. We're reading verses 1 to 4 and 12 to 28. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, "As you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I'm going to send you to them." "Very well," he replied. So he said to him, "Go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me." Then he sent him off from the valley of Hebron. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering around in the fields and asked him, "What are you looking for?" He replied, "I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they're grazing their flocks?" "They've moved on from here," the man answered. "I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. "Here comes that dreamer," they said to each other. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." When Reuben, the older brother, heard this, he tried to rescue Joseph from their hands. "Let's not take his life," Reuben said. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him into this cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty, there was no water in it. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. The working out of this story is the final part of Genesis, showing through one family God's developing relationship with the people of Israel as they come under the sway of powerful Egypt. In Jacob's sons we have the 12 tribes. To discover more of their characters, you can read their father's blessing on them in chapter 49. In the person of Joseph, then, we might read the people of Israel, taken into captivity, losing all the bounty that seemed a reward and conclusion to the promises of God. At first valued, then despised, and lastly, too powerful to trust. What follows in Exodus we'll explore in coming weeks. What gets Joseph into this scrape in the first place? He's a dreamer. It might seem fanciful and only fit for a fairy tale to have the young favourite cast into a cell for simply dreaming. So let's be realistic about the danger that dreams pose to the mighty. In 1983, after 7 months of detention, and at the age of 28, a Russian called Irina Ratushinskaya was given 7 years hard labour in the Dubrovlag labour camps for writing poems and not submitting them to the censor. OK, she was married to a human rights activist. OK, they went to rallies and they wrote for underground press. The state charged her with agitation carried on for the purpose of subverting or weakening the Soviet regime. In particular, she had written poems critical of the Soviet Union. In her midwinter cell, awaiting sentence, she wrote, "Steeply the stars are scattered," which ends with these lines. 5 paces to the window and 4 from wall to wall, and the mounted eye blinks through the iron. The monotonous guile of an interrogation trails past. The young escort is guilelessly caught in soldierly fashion. Oh, what calmness! To wander silently through the winter, not even allowing the word no to fall from cracked, sewn-up lips. The snowy pendulum has worn away. How many weeks have passed? Only the eye is darker above the poem, the forehead hotter. Through heat and cold, I will reach April. I am already on the road, and God's hand is on my shoulder. Just so perhaps Joseph dreamt amidst visions of corn and cattle. Irina at first valued, then despised, and lastly too powerful to trust. But what became of the Soviet Union just 6 years later? We're reflecting on God's grace in a time of slavery. As we heard and read already when studying Romans, slavery is not just an historic curiosity. It still exists in every corner of our world, and the effects of our country's historical dependence upon the enslavement of others for our enrichment reverberate through the years and land on our doorsteps as daily news. Not just in the justifiable anger and frustration of demonstration and taking the knee, also in the tragic early death of people like Paulette Wilson from Wolverhampton. Paulette came from Jamaica, aged 10, almost exactly as the musical Joseph was making its debut. When did she die? On the 23rd of July this year, aged 64, only a year after the fight to stay in this country, her country, was won. How long was she deprived of citizenship and dehumanised by officialdom, awaiting a decision on her right to remain? 2 years. It was her case that sparked the campaign to highlight people affected by the hostile environment policy, the Windrush generation. Paulette, at first valued, then despised, and lastly too powerful to trust. So many current stories reflect our continuing fear of the stranger in our midst. The fall from grace of Huawei or TikTok come to mind. A recent shocking anti-Semitic outburst of the rapper Wiley perpetuates age-old tropes of conspiracy, greed and disloyalty to the state by the Jew. So as we ponder Joseph's experience and the song Close Every Door to Me still earworms in our minds, let's ask God for grace to acknowledge the dreams of those we marginalise and enslave through ignorance, and courage to stand on the side of the despised.